You'll start, and then we'll go down the line.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Raul Rothblatt, and I'm here to present the Sisters in Freedom proposal. And I've given your committee a dozen letters of support. Actually, since this morning, we have two more coming in. The council member, Stephen Levin, also signed on a letter, and I'll send that as well as Assembly member Joanne Simon. The process of creating a monument should live up to the ideals you want to memorialize. Today, I'm presenting a proposal to build a statue called Sisters in Freedom at Willoughby Square Park, recently renamed Abolitionist Place Park by Brooklyn Community Board 2. This proposal is a model for what the monument process can look like. It's sited at a historically significant location, rises up from grassroots, exemplifies an educational design philosophy, and celebrates the voice of the descendants of the honorees. The city has already funded a contract requiring Willoughby Square Park to build a monument, but this legal commitment does not require Percent for Art. This is the opportunity for the Cultural Committee to try, I would say, a better process. Our choice of Ida B. Wells and 4 other African-American suffragists would educate generations of New Yorkers about a fierce group of women who fought against lynching and for economic and civil rights. This selection would elevate both these empowered women and New York City's central role in the history of their movement. After Ida B. Wells' newspaper was attacked by a racist mob in 1892 in Memphis, she moved to downtown Brooklyn, where many strong black institutions already operated. The women here assisted her with public speaking, fundraising, and publicity. They drove the formation of the influential Black Women's Club movement. It is impossible to understand the progress of the civil rights movement without understanding the work of these women. The selection of Sisters in Freedom by this committee is obvious and deserving. Their activism is a model for us, and we hope you choose it as a template to build monuments citywide.
Thank you. And under time. Next.
Jacob Morris, Harlem Historical Society. By the way, I was responsible for the co-naming of Gold Street, Ida B. Wells Place, and I'm responsible for originally coming up with the concept of a group memorial honoring these 5 great women from Brooklyn. I'm so glad that the majority leader is here today because I know that she carries on in a tradition of these 5 great women from Brooklyn, and that this Sisters in Freedom Memorial would honor their struggle, and it would honor Brooklyn. And in so doing, it would also honor New York City. And there's the connection to bringing history to life, because Abolitionist Place Park is 1 block from where Ida B. Wells lived. And that leads me to my 5 points. Monument siting. Now, this is a real problem, you know, with what's going on. You got Elizabeth Jennings Graham gets thrown off the streetcar in 1854 at the intersection of Pearl and Chatham, downtown Manhattan. And by the way, you know, that was 100 years before Rosa Parks. They just did a statue to Rosa Parks in Montgomery. And that statue is located in the immediate vicinity of where Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus, and where they stopped the bus, and where she was taken off the bus and arrested. And yet, somehow, and I'm so glad, Mr. Chairman, that you brought that out, who makes these decisions? Who really made that decision about Mother Cabrini? And these other siting decisions are verging on the inexplicable. And we did FOIL requests. We've gotten no response as to how the decisions were arrived at. for siting. That includes the decision for the Lyons family in Seneca Village in Central Park, more than a mile from where Seneca Village was. It makes no sense. Elizabeth Jennings Graham at Grand Central Station, when she was thrown off in her Sunday church clothes all the way downtown. And the Colored Sailors Home, by the way, was located at 330 Pearl Street. If you're going to honor the Lyons family, it should be by the Colored Sailors Home.
So I know you've just covered one of your 5
Yeah.
recommendations. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Morris, if you can
Run through the rest quickly.
be more concise. Yes.
Okay, I just, this really, I feel very, very passionate about, that we can do better here in New York City. The Public Design Commission, they've adopted some new guidelines in terms of historian input. I would like that to become permanent. I would like there to be a seat on the Public Design Commission for a historian. And this is especially critically important to fulfill the educational function of monuments that have historical themes. There are 2 categories of monuments, not one. There's the aesthetic monuments, and then there's the historically themed monuments. Now, one of the prior panelists said, well, the community, they like figurative monuments when it comes to historic. That's right. The people of the city, they like figurative monuments because of the educational function of historically themed monuments, not abstract or quotation mark contemporary stylings. Figurative has an educational function for the community. Consideration of best practices around the United States in regards to monument siting selection and artist selection should be examined and considered for adoption here in New York City for approval and to improve our selection criteria and processes. And the Percent for Art program, you were right, this would go downhill for Kendall. But this isn't anything I haven't expressed to him personally, has an abstract and contemporary art bias. That's not his fault necessarily. Because we haven't had a whole slew of monuments with historical functions. Now that we do, we need to consider the educational function of historically themed monuments. And so figurative art should not be discriminated against. Kendall has gone on the record in public stating that they were going to pick Simone Lee when they went back to the office, in spite of the overwhelming, strong sentiment of those wonderful ladies in East Harlem who fought so long against Sims. These are a very knowledgeable group of women, and I just can't say enough about them.
That's fair.
And support. Please, Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
improve the compliance mechanisms for transparency in the legislation that you already passed.
Got it. I see that. Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. Obviously, you've invoked Kendall in a public statement. You know, I don't know if he wants to respond in any way, shape, or form, but I just want to give him the opportunity if he'd like to correct the record in any way or respond. Next panelist.
Hello, my name is Margaret Blair. I'm a performing artist, an educator, and a scholar. For the record, we haven't spoken about anything today. I haven't spoken to any of them, and it's amazing how I have like a similar sentiment. When I'm not studying anthropology and education, I teach dance in a couple of public schools in Harlem. I spent many years in the past drawing, painting, and sculpting through my studies at the fine arts program at FIT. But I care very, very deeply about historical content, lack of representation, and erasure of communities of color in public spaces. So this is what I understand about why I'm here. The process may have worked in the past. I'm not taking anything away from Percent for Art and not saying that they haven't given so much to artists and artists of color. I just really appreciate that work. I think it's hard work, whether you're working for the government or you're working for a private industry. It's hard work. But I understand also, and I've spoken to Mr. Finkelpearl briefly about it, I understand also that at the same time, the public can be regarded and disregarded at the same time. So the way public involvement, the way and the manner that they're being engaged in new works seems broken, or something needs to be fixed. It's maybe outdated. So I think that the community, like myself, I'm always in Councilman Mazel's office. I live in Brooklyn. I'm in his office constantly about everything. I think the public, like myself, we are critical enough to actually chime in for some things, and the way they're being engaged and then disengaged, their opinions are disregarded at the last minute. I think it's disrespectful. I think the communities who live around these particular projected works can critically chime in and give their recommendations and their advice as well. And a lot of what's happening, it's just not aiding in the process. So I've heard someone say today that, we need to slow this down. I don't think so. I don't think we need to slow it down. I just think that the way the community's involved needs to change. I just want to thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Yes, I'm Todd Fine, president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group, and I'd first like to offer my support for the Sisters in Freedom Initiative. I think that's the way that this process could have been done, to talk to community groups, see what sentiment is out there, rather than executive decisions by politicians, which was how all of these major monuments were made. Now, the commissioner repeatedly said that public art is inherently controversial, and if we accept that as a catch-all explanation, we could say this was inevitably going to be controversial, that this large-scale monument initiative would inevitably be controversial. But is that true? No. There are reasons why this monument and boom initiative became extremely controversial, and they are the insufficient funding and inferior processes for a wildly ambitious program at Percent for Art. The ambition can be commended, the implementation cannot. According to my count provided to members of the committee, at least 12 major large-scale monuments are underway, many with short-term deadlines in 1 or 2 years. Major experts of public art process do not believe this is possible. The former director of Percent for Art just explained how a single large-scale monument taxed their resources. How about 12? And PDC said all privately proposed monuments will also go through Percent for Art now? How is any of this possible? It is irresponsible for this committee not to press further about how this new initiative is possible. Percent for Art has invited people to speak about past successes and the capability of staff, but no one is testifying how this specific program, which is distinct from the commissions in the past, can achieve this project on this scale. We have entered a twilight zone, and there's no roadmap and there's no oversight. 3 staff at Percent for Art. This is absurd. It's stressing all agencies to the breaking point, PDC and Parks as well as PDC. The root of the scandal is 1, ignoring and neglecting the city advisory councils, and 2, a rushed, under-resourced process that has led to rash and sloppy decisions that may lead to inferior works in ill-considered locations. There are several problems. First, weak responsiveness to community sentiment and organic organically driven projects. Long before the Monument Initiative, there were existing public art initiatives for Tito Puente, Brooklyn abolitionism, for the literary heritage of Little Syria. These initiatives developed organically, but they're now at the back of the list, and they probably may not be completed for 3, 4, or 5 years, and nobody knows how quickly any of these initiatives are going to be completed with dates of 2 or 3 years. Second is that we've marginalized the Blue Ribbon Commissions. We have lots of testimony from people from the Public Art Program and from other artists, but we don't have any of the members of those the 18-member Women Commission on advising the women's selection, Harriet Sani, the CUNY professor who was on the commission, said it was a charade. They recommended group monuments, and those recommendations were overruled. And the people on the Mayor's Monument Commission also said that their recommendations were ignored, that the final decisions were only took place in 15 minutes at the end of the third meeting. So they didn't feel they had any agency. The decisions were made by political leadership. There's no community involvement, and there needs to be more oversight. Third, we're neglecting community knowledge and sentiment in the selection of these monuments. These can be seen in these location problems that my colleague raised. The Elizabeth Jennings Graham at Grand Central Station makes no sense. Billie Holiday, which he didn't get into, there are huge sentiment in Addisley Park to cite that in Queens, where there was a huge jazz move. Why do it at Queensborough Hall? Why didn't anybody talk to the people of Queens before we did this? This is what this committee needs to do, have a rigorous oversight into these specific siting decisions, explain why they were occurred, and then we can sort this out. This monument initiative is not going to be solved within the next year or two. There's 12 monuments in the process. Let's slow it down, and let's do them all properly. Let's scrutinize it, do it properly, engage the community. Thank you.
You speak really fast, but read remarkably well, remarkably fast, because that was like 15 minutes of testimony condensed into 3, and the truth is I understood every word of it because, yeah, no, that was
High school debate.
That was really impressive, actually. I mean, maybe some of the older folks remember the commercials where the guy used to like speak really fast. That's who you reminded me of. What was that? Yes. That's a different situation altogether. But I just want to say, you do raise a lot of real issues and important issues, and I share some of the concerns, which is part of why, obviously, in this moment of transition, right? Tom is leaving, and there'll be a new commissioner, we hope, soon. But I did start this hearing with talking to Tom and getting him to talk on the record about exactly who is making decisions. And that is important to me, and I think important for all of us to understand what's happening here. So there is more oversight to be done. There are a lot more questions to be answered. We did talk about the resources question, and I just want to say I have concerns. I want to let the next person speak as well, because I'm afraid if I give you the mic again, you're going to give
one comment.
Another 15 minutes in 3 minutes
No,
again.
I think I agree this committee can do good oversight, but we need to have a roadmap of how this 12 monument boom is going to happen. We can't just have to beg for information.
I agree. Absolutely. Last but not least.
Yes, I also can do that kind of speed reading, which I normally do at community boards, but I'm not going to do that. I have a written statement that you have there you can refer to later. I am going to take the liberty of taking a little bit extra time so that I don't have to speed talk, but I appreciate everything you said. So I'm here to talk about the process for the selection of the replacement of the Sims statue. And from a little bit what I'm hearing today in testimony and side comments, I'm actually going to respond to some of those comments to clarify. So, for example, there were not 19 meetings held in terms of engaging the community in East Harlem regarding the replacement for the Sims statue. There were 3 community-wide meetings held at the New York Academy of Medicine, Schomburg Center, and then at the Museo del Barrio for the final artist selection. So those were 3 community-wide meetings. The committee that was formed did in fact meet beginning after the statue was taken down, but does not total 19, and the committee meetings did not always include representatives from Department of Cultural Affairs or Percent for Art. So just want to clarify that. We were promised in the beginning of all of this that there would be $1 million allocated for this and is separate from the Women's Monument Project. So we just want to clarify that we want to make sure that that's promise is kept. Talk about the process. So we were always advised by Tom and Kendall that the community's voice was an advisory voice. We were never promised that we would have the final say. So I just want to make that clear. However, the process leading up to that, the things that we were promised did not happen. So for example, we did not have that many meetings. Towards the end, as we got closer to the artist selection panel, we were told that the committee would have an opportunity to interview the at that time, five finalists. That never happened, and we asked why. We asked to have someone from the committee represent us on that artist selection panel, and we only thought to ask that towards the very end, and I'm glad that we did. We had to push back to get that. The person that was appointed to the panel is an expert, so she qualified, but we were never got an opportunity to speak to the artists, not to interrogate them or anything, but just to get a sense of their thoughts and their vision. We were never told the names or titles or credentials for the artist selection panel. We only met them that very day. The artist selection panel that we saw, again, I'm going to take the liberty of more time because this is important. We will certainly allow you to You're not going
have
anywhere.
extra
Yeah.
time as we have several other people, but I just want to say there are also limitations. But
Thank you, because going forward, this needs to be corrected
Sure.
and addressed.
Sure.
So the artist selection panel, from what I can see, consisted of only one woman of color, and she is the woman that we pushed to have, and we had to push to have on that panel. There were, in fact, only 3 women out of 7. There were, I believe, 4 white people, and 3 people of color. Okay, I'm just gonna put, so we were like kind of shocked when we walked in. It's like, we didn't know, they were briefly introduced and all that, but we just didn't know. There was no literature handed out, no information. So we also questioned the budget for community outreach, because in fact, the community members were the ones that did that outreach for free. Everything from printing and posting flyers and attending community board meetings and getting people to the event, which we did. So we questioned the budget as well. We'd like to see more transparency on that, as well as $1 million. We want to make sure $1 million is applied to this particular project. And I say that because, you all know that Simone Lee was selected by the artists. When I walked into that event, I had no prejudgment. Most of the people that going back again. So the city also promised to have an online engagement process 2 weeks prior to the artist selection process, so that the general public citywide could input on the artists that were finalized, right? So that wasn't put up online until 5 days before the event, which is ridiculous. And we had to promote it. And the artist imagery that was presented was also ridiculous. We couldn't even see or make out the work of at least 2 of the artists very clearly. So during the event, I walked in, and many others walked in, surprised to hear that only 1 artist was going to be joining us. And so I'm like, okay, whatever. So we're still looking at the presentations on screen, and we still can't make out pretty much any of the artists' work. And I'm going to say, it's not a Simone versus Vinnie Bagwell. What was shown to us on the screen of Simone Lee's work was a very shadowy outline of a woman reclined. That's the same exact image that was put online for the general public, for the citywide. We couldn't make out what it was. Had Simone Lee attended or entrusted and respected our community enough to show us her vision, things might have gone differently. Had we were able to see what she was presenting, it might have gone very differently, but she didn't show up, and for whatever reason, we were not entrusted or respected enough to see her proposal, which is ridiculous, and that's why people were outraged, including the chair of the Community Board 11, including Councilwoman Diana Ayala, who can't be here today, but who did speak out on this formally at a press conference. So, and then also we're being subjected to, after the fact, hearing audio of people involved in that selection process assuring that the artists, that Simone Lee's art will go up, and they're going to do whatever they need to do to make that happen. This is after the city and Tom Finkelpearl announced her withdrawal. And people even in this audience snickering and saying that East Harlem, y'all a bunch of bitching and complaining. Exactly what was said, okay? Bitching and complaining about the Tito Puente statue. We've been waiting for that for 10 years. Okay, a certain amount of funding was given, but we need more funding for that in reality in 2019.
So
I really don't appreciate people involved in that selection process ridiculing my community, calling us stupid, telling us we don't know art, we don't know good art. Vinnie Bagwell's art sucks. She's a bad artist. And these are the people that are going to be carrying out and fulfilling this mandate.
Well, obviously that's all that you just said there is unacceptable to say about the East Harlem community and those who have a different perspective. So I appreciate everything that you've said. I appreciate
two more points.
Some of what
So also the figurative issue. Vinnie Bagwell's presentation goes beyond figurative art. She's talking about LED lighting and eternal flame, a lot more than just figurative art. Okay, and it's not bad art. And so she was there for 7 hours, answered every single one of our questions, presented an actual model, said she's open to changing somewhat. So of course people embraced her. And then finally, the proposal or idea around not insufficient funding and possible public-private partnerships, I totally do not support that at all. Because you're opening up a can of worms for developers to come in. No, don't go there. The city needs to invest more money into the Percent for Art agency, and process needs to be transparent, and there are processes in place that should be followed and respected.
Great.
But they're not being.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you have to say. Councilmember Barron has joined us, and I want to give her an opportunity